Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is great to have everyone here today, and I have a very special guest today. Thank you for coming to join me, Jim Barrows.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. I appreciate the warm welcome.
Jim, I think all of my viewers probably already know you. However, there might be one out there that doesn't, or there might be someone who watches in the future that doesn't. And since I've never had you on before, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, well, I'm probably best known for being a host on the Atheist Experience. I've also done Talk Heathen, Nonprofits, and Truth Wanted. All those are, of course, Atheist Community of Austin shows. I have been a board member for the Atheist Community of Austin. I'm also a regular host on The Perspective on the first Tuesday of the month. And I also help out on the Line Sunday show whenever they need an emergency guest host. Although David keeps talking about trying to get me on a little bit more often than whenever he needs somebody. And that's mostly what I do. I don't have my own YouTube channel or TikTok or any of that, although I am on Facebook and Twitter, and I lurk on TikTok. I get entertained by quite a bit of it. That's pretty much who I am online. An atheist for quite some time, and not quite some time, but for a few years.
Okay. It's great to have you. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Jim after the show, there is a link in the description with his link tree. And from that, you can find his Twitter, his TikTok, and so forth. And also listed in the description are all the shows that Jim is co-host for. So if you're interested in seeing him on any of those shows and you forget which ones they are, those are listed there as well.
Yeah.
For today, one thing I do want to let viewers know is there is just a bit of a lag. So if you see me talking over Jim, it's because sometimes he's just a little bit lagged there. So I might not realize that he's talking.
That happens occasionally. It's part of the internet.
Yep. Okay. Just to let people know what I have going on this week, I am doing something special for Valentine's Day. I am doing a tongue-in-cheek advice to Christian men on dating. And then next week's show, I've got a couple of people who are new. I have Curse of Ham coming, who is a closeted atheist, and Curse of Ham has never been on YouTube or has never publicly talked about atheism. So we are going to let Curse of Ham know that this is a safe space to come and talk and not get out, who Curse of Ham really is, because he is a closeted atheist. And we also will be having Lone Spartan. And so that is going to be another day where I'm going to have new guests that we've never met before. And it is always wonderful to recognize, to welcome new people to the community. So for today's topic, I asked Jim to find some of the dumbest questions that he has been asked on some of the call-in shows that he has hosted. And so for your dose of medicine of laughter for the day, we are going to let Jim tell us about some of these crazy questions.
Well, I'm not going to try and pick on too many callers, although there are three that I will pick on. And I'm sure everyone can figure out at least two of them. And if you've seen me on the Sunday show, you could probably guess the third. And we'll leave those for later. But rather than pick on individual callers, I thought we'd talk about some of the topics that they call about, because they really don't. Nobody's offered any new arguments for the last 100 years, and most callers don't come prepared for the meat grinder that is any host on the Atheist Experience or any of the hosts on the call-in shows, because we've all heard these before. There really isn't anything new. And so they don't really come prepared for the wealth of knowledge that is out there and easy to find. And I think the first one is calling it the look at the trees argument. And these are the people who call in and really have no idea what they're talking about. They ask, where do you think we came from? And really, really basic questions that force you, the first thing you got to do is figure out what the heck are they talking about. What do you mean by look at the trees? Where do they come from? Well, they come from seeds. Well, that's not what they usually mean. And so you spend at least 3 or 4 minutes just trying to get at what they actually mean by look at the trees, or what about the Bible, or any of these other things that they come up with, because to them it's so obvious that it had to come from somewhere, so God's the answer, and they haven't really thought it all the way through what that actually means, and that they're appealing to a mystery with another mystery, right? With an even bigger mystery. And so walking them through that is sometimes painful, especially when it's their first time walking through all of these basics. And so you almost kind of go, well, now we need to spend an hour doing Philosophy 101. Now we need to spend an hour doing, in many cases, Science 101. And, there's so many topics that go into where do we come from and how do we get here. And walking them through all that is sometimes difficult, and you've only got a few minutes. And I know one of the big complaints many people have is, why are you spending so much time with this one caller and you don't spend time with other callers? And it's always, you're always balancing, how many callers do I have? How good are these callers? And how good is the conversation we're having now? And sometimes the conversations are more fun for us than they are for the audience. So all those things factor into it. So you're juggling all this, and sometimes you have a producer talking in your ear as well. So, you've got some things going on, and that makes these types of calls a little bit more difficult than they should be, especially when the person has done no Googling. They may have been a straight C student in high school, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, some of us, we've been doing, most of the hosts, myself included, have been doing this for a while. And we read a lot of content, we watch a lot of content, science and philosophy and all this other stuff. And so sometimes it's kind of like, when Matt and I are talking, or any of the hosts are talking, or we're talking to somebody who's got some education, the conversation flows, and you're flying along in 5th gear, and you come into these conversations, and all of a sudden, you've downshifted into 1st gear, and the engines are kind of grinding, and you're kind of going, you got to really slow it down. And yet, keep in mind that you also don't want to lose the audience, because that's what we're here for. So in a lot of ways, those are really annoying calls, because of all that stuff that's going on. And I don't think people realize, what. Not only are we listening to the caller, but we're keeping all this other stuff in our heads too. And so that's why we misstep, and it is harder than it looks. Even when I'm as fortunate as I am to have the crew that backs up the ACA shows. You do this yourself, Kelly, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I am used to being able to show up and just start talking. And that's not what goes into a show by any stretch of the imagination, especially a call-in show. There's so many people behind the scenes that make it possible for us to do that. So for call-in shows and that, just like The Line, who has just David behind the scenes, that he gets everything that he does right as often as he does is just amazing. But those are the things that are going on, and that's what makes those calls really difficult sometimes, is all the things you're juggling, not the call itself, but the digging in, figuring out what the person knows, what they don't know, and how much you can educate them in a short amount of time while juggling being a host, makes those really, really annoying. So...
Yeah, I can relate to that. In that first, I did my undergrad in television production, which was a whole different ballgame back when I was an undergrad, because video didn't exist yet, or actually it did, but it was in its infancy. I mean, we had beta tapes. Um, and I remember one of the shows that I did that I nearly drowned in was 911 was a new thing. And I had on my show the chief of police to explain what 911 was. And before the show, I had him explain it to me. And he went on and on and on about what the system did and how the system worked. Oh, this is perfect. This is going to make a great show. And then when we got into the show and I asked him, so what's 911? He said, it's a phone system. I mean, he was giving me these very short clipped answers. And I realized the problem was that he had explained all of this to me before the show. And it wasn't clicking for him that the audience hadn't heard any of that. And he needed to start over.
Right.
I was very fortunate. I had a co-host, and my co-host took over and jumped in and started filling in the show. And that's when I realized that the real test of a host is to be able to draw out their guest when needed.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do that with you, we have a comment in the chat that I think is a really good comment that I want to come to. And so, Jay, I wasn't ignoring your comment. I was intentionally waiting for a break where I could bring this in, which was, thanks, Grady. Granny, I'm excited about this conversation. I recently challenged my mom with, does it matter to you if it's true? It was one of the hardest convos of my life. Jim, what do you think about that? If a caller came in and was asking something and your response was, does it matter if it's true? Where does the conversation usually go from there?
Wow. We've actually had that very thing come up. And in most cases, the answer is always, well, yes, I do. And you hope that's the case, because if it's not the case, the conversation ends. If they don't care what's true,
Okay.
you can't really go anywhere from that point of view, right? Because, okay, truth doesn't matter to them, then there's nothing to do, right? You could try and convince them that the truth matters, and so that's where you kind of got to get into the whole, how well do you know somebody to be able to convince them of that. But if they aren't already convinced, that sets you back, light years in your conversation. Because first thing you got to do is get them to care about truth. And they just may not. They may just be happy living their lives, doing what they do. And good for them. But yeah, it's hard to have that conversation. Now, when they say yes, they do, then, that's kind of where you start that's where things start getting really tricky, because especially if it's like with your mom, like I've made no secret of it. I'm not out to my parents. Now I say that, and this is actually my name. You can Google me and find me with that name. And you can, if more of my parents ever to Google me, they'd find all my shows and everything else that I do. So I'm not hiding from them either. But they're Luddites, and they don't Google me, and they don't do any social media. And so, I'm lucky to get them to work email correctly. So it is a hard conversation, and I think, first thing you have to do is keep in mind what your goal is, what your overriding goal is. And if it's your parents, especially like a mom or dad, sisters, brothers, any of those close family relationships, if your goal is to keep that relationship, then maybe you don't press. And I don't press my parents because of that, because I know there is no way that I do not have the skill or the ability to not break my mom's heart and therefore piss off my dad and have this whole thing go sideways. And my relationship with my family is primary to me, and I don't want to do anything to hurt that. And because I don't have the skill for that, to avoid that, I don't bring it up. So I'm probably not the best person to do that. And I look at, Matt Dillahunty's told his story with his parents, and so is Seth Andrews. And so look at them, and these, Matt and Seth are very, very articulate, and they're very, very skilled conversationalists on these topics, and even they had problems with their parents. So, and their parents, granted, are a lot more dogmatic than mine are, more Catholic families, so we don't have quite all of that. So, keep that in mind. And if you're going to try and have that conversation, then I would really, really get good at asking more questions than making statements. Because that's going to bypass their resistance to being wrong. Or nobody wants to be wrong, and there's a mental term for it, and I'm having a senior moment here trying to remember what it is. The backfire effect, right? Is you want to avoid that. Asking questions makes it a lot less aggressive to a lot of people, especially if they're past questions. If you avoid words like why, that's really, really key. Why is almost always an attack, or taken almost always as an attack. And just be really, really careful. And when things start getting heated, leave the conversation alone, change the topic.
I actually have some advice on this topic because it was my youngest child, my son, that actually set up the straw that broke the camel's back for me for atheism. And it was by asking a question that is not sensitive. I shouldn't say asking a question, but making a statement that is not sensitive. And that was, my son said to me, the ark could never have worked. There could not have been a global flood. And I said, why not? And he picked something rather mundane. He said, because the methane gas would have killed all the animals. And I said, okay. And we left it at there, and he left. So after he left, then I Googled it. And I found about 4 different websites that all told me that my son was right. That there is no way that a single window in an ark could provide enough ventilation to keep all those animals alive. And that set up making me open to listen to more about why the ark could not have happened. And once the ark was destroyed, because I believed in biblical inerrancy, it only takes one fact to take the whole thing down. And that is something I've known for a very long time, because my parents were unbelievers. And I spent 30 years trying to convince them to be believers. And I always knew that I was never going to do it by telling them Bible verses, because they didn't believe the Bible. And without the Bible, I had nothing. And so once the Bible is the only thing I've got, once you break the Bible, there's nothing left, because the whole house of cards is built on that one block.
Yeah. That's the difference between you and I is, as a Catholic, we didn't have that biblical literalism. So whether or not Noah was true doesn't matter as much to Catholics, because it could all just be, allegory and tales, and doesn't have to be real. What's more important is the point of the story, which I'm not really sure what the point of Noah would be, but anymore. But I completely agree.
And student Dr. Ben says, how come is usually better phrasing than why, because how come implies a desire to understand, whereas why implies a challenge.
Yes, very much. I completely agree with that. Student Dr. Ben, that is absolutely great. Yeah.
And Ben says that was for my psychiatry rotation. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does.
And incidentally, my son is a psych major.
Okay.
He wasn't at the time that he said that to me. He was still a high school student back then, but he is now a psych major.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there's one of the books that I read is called Never Split the Difference. And it's done by a gentleman by the name of Chris Voss, who was the lead FBI international negotiator for hostage taking. And his book is on negotiation. And the parallels between what he talks about and street epistemology, huge parallels between the two. But he's the one who's actually turned me on to the aggressiveness of why. Asking good questions, and what leads you to believe? And then, Ben's question, which I have completely senior momented out. How come? Yeah, those are really, really good lead-ins to those questions. But keep in mind what you're trying to do, too, because it's really, really easy to spin off into some really, really angry stuff if you're not careful.
Skits Crusher says, I came out as an atheist to one of my veteran organizations when they asked me to conduct the prayer.
Yeah, that would be an interesting time to do it. What does he tell us do they tell us what the result was, or?
No, I don't have anything further from him.
Okay.
The one place that I have never mentioned my atheism, and it's not because it's something I wouldn't talk about, because I have no problem. Although where I live, being an atheist is a serious oddity. I live in Alabama.
Yeah.
But the one place I worry about it a little bit is in court. Because one of the judges that I work with still says, "So help me God" at the end of the oath, and I even said something to the head of the Contra program where I volunteer. I said, "I don't want to take that oath. I have no problem swearing to tell the truth, but to me, adding that to the end, you might as well ask me, 'So help me, pink unicorns.' It undermines the oath, and I
Right.
don't want to undermine the oath." And she said, "Well, just when he does that, right before he says, 'So help me God,' just say 'I do' before he gets a chance to say."
Yeah, and I don't know if that's. I would talk to maybe FFRF about that, because I don't
did.
know that.
I
Yeah.
did.
And is that even constitutional to add?
It's not unconstitutional. I mean, they can't demand that you take that oath, but the problem is that I also don't want to tick off the judge,
Right.
because I'm not there on my own behalf. I'm advocating for a child. And
Right.
I have to walk a fine line between, you know, standing for what I believe in and advocating for this child that I'm an advocate for.
Yeah, and time and place are very, very important times to things to consider.
And it makes a big difference just how delicate the case is that I'm working on. Most of the cases we work on, are cut and dry, but I've had a couple that were really delicate, and I had one where I walked in where I already knew the judge was ticked about some stuff, and I didn't want to say a word because anything I said could possibly have caused problems, and the judge was already on our side, so the best thing I could do is just shut up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely understand that one. Yeah, I'm here in Texas, so being an oddball is, yeah. Not getting involved in side conversations at restaurants is always entertaining, especially when you're out for breakfast on Sunday.
We have an excellent question from Lord Snuffles, who asks, when I came out as an atheist, I was told I wasn't really. I was just angry at my abusive and religious father. Is there any way to prove them otherwise?
I
I
don't
don't know
know.
that you can prove it. I'm going to go ahead and handle this, and I'm going to let
Yeah.
you answer it after me, because to be honest with you, I would love to be a host and try my hand at hosting on a call-in show. And I would love that opportunity. And I haven't done it myself because I don't know how to set one up through my own show. And one day I might see if I can get an invitation to guest host on a call-in show. But here's the way I would handle that is, I have a lot of people, that isn't the issue, but it's the same general idea. Particularly, I'm having an argument with people who don't know me, have never known me, and they say, "Well, you were never really a Christian," which kind of is the same thing. And what I ask them is, what does one have to do to be a Christian? And usually they say, "Well, you just have to believe." And I say, "Okay, I did believe." And they say, "Well, you didn't really believe. You just believed you believed." I say, "Okay, define the word believe. How is it possible to believe you believe, but not really believe?" can you define the word belief so someone can believe something without really believing it? It's not possible.
Yeah.
That's where I go.
Yeah. Also, I mean, if you're going to start that conversation, head them off at the pass and say, yeah, I was angry at my dad, and his religion was, and his religiosity, but that's not why. And you basically are accusing yourself of things that you know your interlocutor is going to accuse you of, to take the sting out of it and pull the fangs. And use that as a bridge to get you onto the topic to why you became an atheist in those conversations. And, just admit that, yeah, that was the case, but here's the other things that went along with it, is probably the best way. But if they are really closed-minded, you may not be able to get through to them even with that. Even with admitting to it. And I'm not saying if that was not the beginning of the, slide into atheism or the journey into atheism, then you need to make sure that you state that. If it was, then you also need to admit that too. I don't know, what the sequence of events there was. But if you were angry, then you admit it, and if you weren't angry, then you need to state that as well. But however you're going to handle that part of it, do it up front and admit it, and then move on to the next topic that you want to in the conversation before moving forward. That may or may not help. Hopefully it does. Just kind of depends on the conversation you're having with them.
Skitscratcher has a follow-up because you had asked how it went when he came out, and the answer is, it went better than I thought. I explained it to the whole organization, and they were cool with it. They even offered me the opportunity to do a non-religious prayer, whatever that means. Actually, I kind of like non-religious. It's not a prayer, but just an offering of thanksgiving. Just just saying we are thankful that we have this opportunity to be together. I'm thankful for the meal. I'm thankful for good. Just say what you're thankful for, as opposed to saying anything to a deity.
There are a number of really good opening remarks, prayers, whatever you want to call it, by atheists. I know Arizona State Legislature has had atheists come in a couple of times and deliver some really, really good stuff. And Marcus Aurelius in Meditations has a really, really good reminder that, hey, I need to remember that I want to meet people who are going to piss me off. They're going to be pains in my neck. They're going to lie. They're going to do all these things. I just need to remember that this is going to happen, and we're going to move forward, and I want to be the better person for it. You can find that quote. That's probably an interesting place to lead off with, as a reminder that, hey, we need to be better than the people around us, because they may be having bad days. They may be having a day that just leads them to be ticked off at everything, and you're on the wrong end of that. So those are the types of things that you might want to look at for an opening prayer so much, or an opening reminder of what it means to be human and how to be human. So I would go look at some of those atheist addresses or secular addresses to various legislatures and grab some ideas from there.
That sounds like an absolutely wonderful idea. It might behoove us all to be prepared with that kind of a thing anytime we go to a family gathering where we might be asked to do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to our topic because we have caught up with all of the questions and comments from the chat.
Okay.
What else have you been asked on shows that has been particularly amusing?
All the variations on the watchmaker argument are always entertaining. Some of them actually use the watchmaker, which is always kind of nice, but sometimes they go, well, what about a factory? No, it's just a watchmaker in disguise. So they've done it with factories. They have done it building cars, building helicopters. I heard one pastor, this wasn't a call, but talk about knock on the door, and there's all the same type of really bad analogies. And it's bad on a number of fronts. One, it's bad because human beings are really, really bad at recognizing design. And my go-to on this is there's off the shore of Japan, there's a set of what looks like stairs for giants. And the scuba diver that found them and a bunch of other folks believe that these are, in fact, proof that giants once existed because these are stairs. But you go talk to geologists and they go, no, this is just the way this type of rock breaks underwater. It breaks in 90-degree angles and relatively flat. And so that's a really good example of how bad we are at recognizing design when we see it. The other thing that I've been going to a little bit more lately is I have a tree. Nobody has ever seen the tree, and yeah, Eric, exactly. I'll get to Tangelo here in a bit. But I have a tree. I want you to, nobody's ever seen it before. I want you to tell me if it's designed or if it's natural. How would you go about doing that? What's the process? And there is no process. We don't know. People will bring up, oh, look for gears. Well, there's a insect, I believe it's in Africa. It's called the leaf cutter. And they have cogs on their legs that they use to jump, like grasshoppers, and that's how they get away.
Brainbug is in the chat. Brainbug, send us a link to a website or something with the bug that Jim's talking about. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I believe it's a leaf cutter, and I'm probably about to be proven wrong on the name of it, but I'm pretty sure it's a leaf cutter. I actually Googled animals with cogs, and that's what actually came up. And I was like, oh, cool. But it's evolutionary. It's a dead end because the problem is once one of the cogs breaks, he can't jump, and that's his primary defense against getting eaten is jumping away. But they also, I believe, have one of the longer jumps that are out there. So even something that we would think of like a cog has been used by nature at some point. And so cogs don't help you. Nature has almost every pump we know of in some way, shape, or form, so that doesn't help you with this. There's a lot of things that just don't help with this, with finding out if this tree is. Now, if I have two trees and I tell you one is natural and one isn't, now you got something to go on. Same thing if I have 100. Now you have more and more to go on in terms of how do you go about determining whether this tree nobody has seen is real or created, or natural or created. The other problem is that, our primordial soup, abiogenesis, chemicals do what chemicals do. And there are chemicals, and I believe they're called prebiotic, and I'm sure someone on chat's about to check me on this, but that are self-replicating and that they will make, this is colio. All right, so what is it without the Latin?
I quickly looked at it on Wikipedia as soon as Brainbug put that up, and I'm looking at it and I'm not even finding a common name. This is the only name I'm seeing for it.
Okay.
Here, I'll get a picture of it for us.
Leaf cutter, maybe it's not a leaf cutter. A grass cutter is what I said, not leaf, grass. Is it grass cutter? Anyway, so as we, there are chemicals, and the chemicals do what they do, and this is kind of how a lot of the precursor chemicals we need to get to RNA and DNA and all the other things that make us up get there very, very slowly. These chemicals do what chemicals do. And so it's not the same thing as design. It is simply nature doing what it does. And watches and factories and all of these other examples of the watchmaker don't account for this, right? Watches don't reassemble themselves or don't assemble themselves. There's no mechanism for them to assemble themselves. Whereas with chemicals, you put two chemicals that are going to react together, they're going to react. They don't need anything. So that is the problem. A lot of the problems with the watchmaker. It just doesn't make any sense from the beginning. So leaf hopper. Okay, there we go. Thanks, Brain Bug. I'm glad. I have a senior memory and occasionally do get things wrong. Well, more than occasionally. So
it is always wonderful to have Brain Bug in the chat. He can answer any bug questions that we come up with.
Yeah. So, and that is, and they think they've got such a gotcha with this that they haven't thought it all the way through as to what that really means. We know things are designed because we know what's designed. And so, so things that are built are not self-replicating so far. Right? We haven't gotten to that.
We might be able to make a robot that can make another robot.
Yeah, on its own and decide when it needs to. There are a number of really, really good science fiction horror stories about that exact problem of, automatons building themselves, robots building themselves. Whether you're talking Stargate or Horizon Zero Dawn or... there's a couple more that I'm missing, I'm sure, but all those deal with that. We just haven't done it yet. We don't have code that can write code yet very well. And let me emphasize very well. Humans are still better at writing code than code is. But there are code generators out there that will generate quite a bit of code, and I've used some of them. Even recently, and they still pretty much suck. They don't write as nearly as efficient code as we do, but it is a lot more bulletproof, so there's some trade-offs there. But yeah, the operative word there is yet. We don't. And that would still not be the same thing as chemicals just doing what chemicals do in the presence of other chemicals, right? That's still a actor acting on assembling things, which I don't think is quite the same as what chemicals do.
Just in case says actually they have made self-replicating robots. Xenobots are real.
Okay.
That's interesting. I didn't know that either.
I'm not terribly surprised, but I didn't want to say something without being able to recall exactly more about it, but it's not a surprise. At the University of Vermont, yeah. Not a big surprise. Robotics has come so far in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's really quite amazing. So.
And Jenny says humans are still far better drivers than any Tesla anywhere.
So far. They're on their way. There are still a number of problems. Detecting colors is a huge issue. And the darker colors, especially black, very, very difficult to deal with on a regular basis. Because shades of black are still black, or shades of blue aren't necessarily blue, light blue to blue, light black. It's tough, and everybody should be doing better with that as well. It's not taking any burden of testing away from any of those folks, but it is dealing with colors is difficult for computers. So, but
and wrong one. Justin says it's only a few months old, so xenobots are still a new thing.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
So you are not behind. Justin is just absolute cutting edge.
Excellent. Good. Somebody's got to be. I have trouble keeping up with my own field and enough science to stay ahead on the atheist activist front, because we have to know so much more than folks who just study the Bible. Which is the next type of call I wanted to talk about, is the Bible is the proof. Okay. Because the hardest thing sometimes with biblical folks, and Kelly, you may have some experience with this, is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And trying to get somebody out of this and look at all of the scholarship that shows that we have no idea who wrote this. Luke's got the strongest, and I say that not meaning it's strong at all. It's just the strongest of the four, that you have it written in a style of Greek that doctors would know, and write in. Highly educated people would know and write in. And you have a Luke who is a doctor who hangs around Paul. That's the best evidence I've heard so far for Luke being written by Luke. Wow. That's no handwriting analysis, no textual criticism on this, from that Luke or anything.
But even that doesn't get you very far, because Paul never met Jesus.
Right.
And one of the things that absolutely floored me, and I've read the Bible cover to cover 5 times. I have also read the New Testament alone a number of times, and I've also read various topics. I memorized the entire book of First John, and I memorized the first chapter of John. I'm very familiar with the Bible, and yet I never noticed that Paul specifically says that he didn't learn the gospel from any of the apostles. He learned it from a vision. And I had always been taught that, okay, Paul had his vision, but right after the vision, he goes to Jerusalem and he sits at the feet of Peter and he learns more about Jesus from Peter. No, Paul didn't go to Jerusalem till years later. And he specifically says that that's not where he learned the gospel. And I was like, how did I miss this?
Yeah. How did you miss it? What is it? Half of a number of Paul's letters are forgeries, are fake. They weren't written by Paul. They're just added in there. I think there's 7 or 8, don't quote me on the number, that are actually there. But just trying to get some folks to realize that the scholarship on this is really, really clear. The scholarship is really, really clear that Mark has been copied through all of them verbatim, and they just add on to it. And just getting to the Christmas story, because the popular Christmas story that everyone knows comes from all of the Gospels. And you have, which creates a problem, because where did Jesus spend his childhood? In Galilee, where he's from, or in Egypt? Because it couldn't have been both. Just little things like that. It's really, really hard to get folks to realize that this is the scholarship, that what they've been taught is entirely 100% wrong. It just doesn't add up to the facts that we have. And so that one, you're really climbing uphill. If you have someone who really believes the Bible is true, every word of it, and especially the New Testament, breaking them out of this is just going to be really, really difficult. And so that's kind of where you start chipping away, by pointing out there are inconsistencies in the Bible. There are things that don't make sense. And just because the King James Version, don't get me started on that, doesn't seem to show the literal copying word for word of Mark in all the other Gospels, doesn't mean it didn't happen. And that's just kind of where the scholarship is. And this type of stuff is also perpetuated by almost all the apologists. I very rarely hear an apologist willing to admit that the New Testament is problematic because of all the copying going on, that you don't have 4 separate Gospels. You have one Gospel that's been copied 3 times. And that none of those people were eyewitnesses. That is just so ingrained. And then all the disciples that were martyred for it. The only thing we know about, getting even to that, because the only way we know that is from Gospels that aren't canon, that aren't in the Bible, that were discarded as heretical. So we only have Peter and Paul martyred for sure in the Bibles? I forget.
In the Bible, all we've got is Peter for sure.
Right.
Most people will grant James as having been martyred, but we're not really sure who James was.
Yeah, that's problematic. the brother of Jesus.
The other thing that I learned shortly after deconversion, and most of this, Vice Rhino Apologia really set the basis for most of what I started learning and showing me where to look and what to look at. And one of the biggest things I learned from Apologia that was another just huge shocker was that all of the apostles disappear after Acts chapter 7 and they're never heard from again. And I was like, "Oh, you've got to be kidding. No, there's plenty in Acts about the apostles. No, there isn't.
Yeah.
They're gone."
Yeah. And we're just talking about, 4 books in the New Testament and not the Old Testament and all the rest, all the other problems that you have. And so it is a huge topic to begin chipping away at, especially on a phone call. So this is another one where you're juggling time on the call, other callers, and everything else, trying to chip away at the Bible. And I honestly don't do a good job with it. I don't care what the Bible says until you prove God exists. Is my way out of that. And it's not that I can't do it. I don't do it as well as Apologia or Vice Rhino or even Derek over on Myth Vision, who's gets some really, really good scholars on his show on all of these topics. I'm fairly decent at it, but that is kind of my attitude towards it. Is I don't care what the Bible says until you prove God exists. And then you got to prove that God wrote or influenced or did something to the Bible. And then we can talk about the problems in the Bible once you've done those two things. So start there. And again, I do that just to short circuit all of that. It's not that those things aren't important, but I've got 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes on a call. And to deal with everything in the Bible, that is a very, very short amount of time to deal with all the problems in the Bible and all the scholarship and everything else it would take in many cases. And even then, you're not guaranteed to get an admission that maybe there's a problem with the Bible or two. So I could do better with that, I'm sure, but we have short periods of time, so...
Well, that's one of the beauties of inerrancy, because if your caller believes in inerrancy, you only need it to be wrong on one point.
Yeah, and most of your apologists have done a good job of inoculating them against some of those. If you can get one point, everything else starts to chip away and fall apart, without a doubt,
Purple has an interesting comment, piggybacking on what you said a minute ago. I go a step further. I don't care if God exists unless you can show me that he's done something on Earth in the last century. Which is
there's
a
really
good
good.
point. Maybe God's dead. God left.
Yeah. Theology of all the realms of human knowledge in the last 100 years have advanced so far. We've gone from not being able to fly to landing on the moon, and putting so much stuff into orbit that we now have to worry about cleaning it up. We have gone to the bottom of a lot of the oceans. There's still places that we could only send probes to because we just don't quite have the technology to get all the way down there. Fields of medicine, everything else. Every area of human knowledge has advanced except one: theology. Theologists are still talking about the same arguments they did 1,000 years ago and the same concepts they had 1,000 years ago. What new about God has been discovered in the last 1,000 years? What's new? Nothing. Augustine's, all that stuff is just rehashed old stuff. That's all they've done. William Lane Craig's Kalam is not new. So... space is not real. The moon is hollow. I thought the moon was an egg. At least according to Doctor Who.
Jenny says, ooh, he said probe.
All right, let's try not to get a strike on this video.
And God says the first half of the 20th century would have been a good time for God to chime in, but crickets.
Well, it's because Hitler was Christian. Again, let's not get any strikes on this for going too far. But yeah, I agree. The Holocaust, the killing fields in Cambodia and Vietnam and the Russian gulags. There's been plenty of places for God to at the very least, send somebody. But
Justin has just posted this link, which is
yeah,
to an NPR article on the self-replicating robots. So if anyone is interested in more information on self-replicating robots, here is a link to an article where you can get some more information on that. And if I remember, in fact, I think I'll just do it right now as soon as Jim is talking and I have a minute, as I'm just going to copy that link and I'm going to go stick it in the description as well, so you can get it there as well.
yeah. So yeah, the next one is actually kind of a weird call. And again, I'm not really trying not to call out individual callers. So you can go find this on, I believe, Atheist Experience, where he tried to say that men are God, that we'll eventually become God. So we'll have some sort of awakening and become spiritual beings. And that's just kind of like, wait a minute, you're redefining God, and you're redefining a bunch of terms to make this work, and that just doesn't work. And this redefining words gambit has become one of my biggest pet peeves, because invariably you end up redefining words, agreeing to something with the redefined words, and if somebody's coming in at the end of the conversation, it sounds like you've agreed to something you haven't agreed to. And if you're dealing in the modern world and today's world with a dishonest interlocutor, they will take a clip of you agreeing to that and then claim that you have agreed to something you didn't agree to, and go running around going, victory, victory, we convinced an atheist of this. And that has happened on several occasions. It has happened sort of kind of to me. And it's happened to Cease to Know. And shoot, I can't think of who the third one was, all by the same person. And I'm not going to mention his name, but he's the atheist who turned Muslim. He is one of the most dishonest interlocutors that I have ever had the displeasure of talking with. I will talk with Otangelo if I've got no other callers. Canadian Catholic, I'll talk with him if I've got no other callers. That guy, no way, no how. He called me on The Perspective, and we got involved in a conversation on truth where he was basically misinterpreting the map for the place. And I didn't do a good job of articulating it. And then he calls me after the show, and I'm already in bed. Or he doesn't call, but he texts. And so I answer him back, and he's like, hey, I'm going to do a review now. And I'm like, huh? I'm going to bed, dude. No. And he says, well, other atheists think you're wrong, too. And he goes all this stuff. And it's basically kindergarten tactics to try and get me on his show. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, no, this is, if you really wanted to have a conversation with me about this or review this, you just set up a time and a date, just like you did and other people do, right? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't talk to me 2 hours later when you can look at a time zone. Everybody knows where I live. I'm in Texas. We're central. So you know what the time zone is. And yeah, no, just don't do that. But he's also, clipped other people where they've redefined terms. Whenever someone says, well, I'm comfortable with whatever term you want, and so we can use whatever definitions you want, no, hold them to the feet to the fire. use common definitions right out of either the dictionary, or if you're in a technical conversation, keep those there. But redefining terms to make your point, allowing your interlocutor to redefine terms to make their point, generally means they don't understand their point well enough to use the right words. Mm-hmm. So that has become a huge pet peeve for me, is redefining words, especially when you're trying to do something like men can become gods, or we can evolve into some energy form or something like that. No. So.
Purple says Mormons believe that each man of their church will become a god and have his own world to build.
I have heard this about Mormons on multiple times, and the few Mormons I've talked to about it have denied it, and I don't know why. I would love to find some doctrine of theirs that says that. But I keep trying to read the Book of Mormon and just find it hysterical and boring. So
I was just going to ask, is Junk Shop Library in the chat? Junk Shop Library reads chapters out of the Book of Mormon for our entertainment from time to time. And so he might know the answer to that one. But I have not seen him today, so I'm not sure that he's there. But he might have an answer for us on that one. Purple says that she heard it from 2 ex-Mormons. It's possible that this is one of those doctrines that you can only hear from an ex-Mormon.
It's very, very true. It could also be like, I have run into a number of Catholics who believe very, very strange things from what I was taught as a Catholic. Mm-hmm. And I believe some things that, as a Catholic, that aren't actually in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the book on, if it's not in there, Catholics don't believe it, or shouldn't believe it anyway. And so it may just be cultural or something along those lines, where it was taught at one time, but now it's not, or anything along those lines. But yeah, I would really like something a lot more definitive than, and keep in mind, I'm not saying the ex-Mormons who told you are wrong. I'm saying they were probably right, and the Mormons I talked to were probably also right, because this is how things, people don't aren't always on the same page in large organizations, including Mormonism and Catholicism. So,
yep. And Raging Atheist says there's different factions. Those on the compounds are more likely to have the more fundamental doctrines.
Yeah.
And along those lines, I was raised Catholic at a very young age, but my parents left the Catholic Church when I was 7, and my dad went to agnosticism, and my mom was always somewhat Catholic. I always found her position to be strange, because her position was Christianity is false, but if it's true, then it's the Catholic version. And the issue that took them away from the church and broke faith for them was birth control. I was born in 1961. My parents were married in the late 1950s, and at that time, the Catholic Church was very anti-birth control. Mm-hmm. And after 4 kids, my parents said, "That's enough. We don't want any more." And my dad said, for us, it came down to one of the 3 had to go. We either had to get a divorce, stop going to church, or I forget what the third option was. Mm-hmm. And he said, we didn't want to get a divorce. So that was the end of the church.
Right. Yeah. The church is still, the American church is a little more lenient in places. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for the most part, the church is still frowns on birth control of any kind. And it's like, no, you just don't understand. There are people who massive health risks to have a pregnancy, and there's a time and a place to do it, and you've got to be ready, and you've got to have the things prepared if you want to do it right, and not everybody does that, is ready for that at a particular point in time. And we'll just leave off the whole sex is fun and type thing. But
Well, and we saw exactly that because our next door neighbor was Catholic and they stayed with the Catholic Church and they had 8 children and it drove her mad. She could not handle 8 children. It was too much for her. And yeah,
yeah,
it literally drove her insane.
yeah. Uterus is not a clown car. I don't care what the Duggars say. That's just that is really hard on the health. And you can't raise the kids with a large number of kids. You got the oldest raising the youngest at some point in order to deal with the chaos. Yeah, that is just the church will probably never change its stance on that, but it really needs to rethink how it thinks about that, especially in today's world where things are so much more complicated than we need to raise a lot of kids because nature wants to kill, 5 out of 7 of them or something like that, wants to kill most of them. That's no longer the case. Most kids survive.
Fun fact, in my state, the death rate exceeded the birth rate last year. Because of COVID, the death rate here in Alabama exceeded the birth rate last year.
Yeah, that's not good. Or it is. People dying is never good. Population going down is probably good for the environment in some way, but that's kind of not, doing it through COVID is not the way we want to do it, right?
Correct.
We want to do it through people choosing not to have kids or reduce the number of kids. But anyway, yeah.
My daughter, who happens to be a pediatrician, did tell me that because of COVID, a lot of people did have a lot fewer children in the last 2 years. The number of babies born is sharply dropped.
Yeah. Yeah, that is not a surprise. Healthcare is a whole nother topic. My girlfriend is a hospice nurse, and in the last couple of months that we've been together, I've gotten an earful from her side of the whole thing. COVID, hospice, hospitals, and all of that, and it is very, very terrifying. And now Congress is attempting to cap nurse pay.
Seriously? I wasn't aware of that.
Both sides of the aisle, yep. So what's happening is, for instance, here in Texas, in particular, nurses are realizing that they're underpaid, and so they'll go become a travel nurse, and they'll double their pay. They're getting $100 an hour, and at the height of COVID, they were getting $200 an hour for a travel nurse. A travel nurse goes to another hospital for a particular length of time, usually 2 to 3 months, where they're going to work, 60, 70 hours, usually in a 3 or 4 day period, and then get the rest of the time off. Something along those lines, or week on, week off, but they're still getting $200 an hour for this, or $100 an hour. And they don't care that they're being treated like crap. They don't care that their patient load is high because they're getting paid so well. It makes up for that. Also, they don't care about the politics. They don't care about what management is doing. They're there to do a job. They're mercenaries. They're there to do a job, get paid, and get out. Which is not what any of those nurses signed up to be. They didn't sign up to be mercenaries. They didn't go through all the education they had to be mercenaries. And yet, that is the only way that they can survive mentally and emotionally, is to do that. Well, here in Texas, our pro-business governor has decided that nurses working for a hospital can't become a travel nurse just to get assigned back to the same hospital. And so what's happened is all the good nurses have become travel nurses in other states. So what happens here in Texas with the nurses that are left? You're not getting the best of the best. You're getting people who can't become travel nurses for some of them, for legitimate reasons, like they have family and they want to move, et cetera. But some of them because the travel nurse companies won't hire them. So that's problematic. And that's what's happening across the nation, is that they are going after the nurses, and apparently, according to Raging Atheists, they've capped the doctors as well. And this is not the way to solve the problem. If you want more nurses to keep, it's a supply and demand problem, right? Their supply of nurses is going down. Nurses are leaving because of compassion fatigue. They've stopped caring, and so they can't keep doing it. And they're leaving in droves, right? My girlfriend is pointing out that they've got 2 nursing schools in her area. She's in East Texas. That will produce enough graduates to fill all the hospital vacancies in her area. And in a year, none of them will be there. They will have quit nursing altogether. That's the numbers she's saying here in East Texas. And now those numbers are probably reflected in some way across the nation as well. I'm not sure exactly what the percentage is, but you're not keeping them. So if you want to keep the nurses, one, stop treating them like shit, which means that stop making medical care a freaking profit center. And a lot of this goes away, right? And 2, you do what New York has done. New York has made getting a nursing degree free.
Well, actually, what we really need is national health care.
Yeah, like I said, remove profit. Healthcare is not a profit center.
Right.
Because you have made you've made human misery a profit center. It just shouldn't be. I know the death panels and all the rest of the right-wing stuff. We already have death panels. It's called they're raising prices on across the board, and the poor can't afford health care anymore. So you already have that. So
changing the topic. Platinum Mind says, I was raised Catholic, became a born-again Christian in my 20s, and now have been free from stupidity for more than 10 years. This actually is somewhat the same journey that I had, because I was raised Catholic, although only till I was 7, and then agnostic. I converted to born-again Christianity at 16. Then I was a born-again Christian for 42 years. I'm a little slow. And I've only been an atheist for, let's see, what month is it? It's February. So it's 2.5.
Yeah, I know the topic is annoying calls to call-in shows, but annoying things atheists do is call religion stupid and themselves stupid for believing in it, and that is not the case. Okay. You weren't. You were convinced of something you were convinced something is true, that only when you educated yourself and tried to break out of those walls that kept you in, did you begin to realize that it wasn't true. And I think one of the things people don't realize is that most apologists aren't really talking to atheists. No apologist out there, even when they're talking to an atheist, aren't trying to convince the atheist. They're inoculating the believers against the atheists. That's their whole objective. That's why we hear these same things over and over again, and we hear things that are effective at inoculating them. And so you're not stupid. Religion isn't stupid. It's carefully crafted to keep you believing and to keep your faith. And they're doing it most of them are doing it from the best possible place. And we have to meet them at that place. We have to meet them halfway. We can't call them stupid. We can't do all these things. Even if it was true, you couldn't do it, because all you're doing is putting them on the defensive, and you're not going to get anywhere in that conversation. But none of us were idiots for believing, because of all the things that were put in our way to keep us from really thinking about it, right? I was a Catholic. I went to CCD. We went to church. We hung around other Catholics, and we hung around other Christians, and all of this stuff keeping us in it. And I believe you had mentioned earlier that you had never, you go back and you read the Bible today and you go, how did I miss this? How did I miss that Paul never met Jesus? And Paul didn't go talk to Peter until later in his ministry. And how do you miss all these little details until somebody points them out to you, or you go and read the book from an atheist point of view, not from a believer point of view?
Right.
I say over and over again that if you wanted to prove Santa Claus was real, you could. You could do it today. Because you go look at all the Santa Claus stuff that comes out. How could this guy not be real? all these things you can go back and evidence that it's true. It's not until you try to disprove something that you get anywhere. Science doesn't try and prove anything. It spends a lot of its time trying to disprove stuff. How do we falsify this? And that is a key piece that we all miss in science training, because in science, you do experiments to show that something works. You never do an experiment to show it doesn't work. And part of the reason you do that is because they're trying to educate you. So did this experiment not work because it wasn't supposed to work, or because you did the experiment wrong? Right? Those two things are the same result. You want to make sure you do the experiment right and you understand experimental procedure. Therefore, we're going to do things that make so that they did the procedure right because it worked and it proved whatever it is you're trying to prove. And so we get this slightly warped idea of science, and science teachers don't do a good enough job pointing out how much work goes into disproving stuff, or making predictions. And then if the prediction doesn't come true, realizing that your hypothesis was wrong and adjusting course and trying to fit the new data in. They don't really do a good job of doing that. And if we don't do that everywhere in our lives, it's easy. I mean, I think all of us as atheists have this experience of, oh, wait, I used to believe this, and until something comes up in front of us, we realize that, that belief is now wrong. But we continued to believe it until we came across evidence of it, that belief was wrong. And so we all do that still. And it's not always religious stuff, right? Sometimes it's very secular stuff.
Yes.
So don't call people stupid. Don't call religion stupid. It doesn't do anybody any good. Just remember that if you're not applying critical thinking to every aspect of your life, you're going to believe stuff that isn't true. And doing that requires a huge amount of effort and energy that, quite frankly, I'd rather go sailing with, or go hang out with friends, or go grab a pizza and beer with friends, those types of things, right? We can't spend all of our time doing that. So don't beat yourself up. Don't beat other people up for believing what they were told by people in authority who really should have done the work themselves but didn't.
Which leads me to the question that I asked Matt Dillahunty when I met him just a few weeks after my deconversion was, I'm so far behind. I've spent decades trying to ignore what was out there. What do I need to read to catch up?
Right.
And he recommended a few books for me, and I did read them, but I still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, it is an education process, and it's fun and it's exciting, and the world is a better place. But also, you think about how thick those walls are that the church has put up, and I say the church and the Christian church in the most general sense has put up over 2,000 years. It's not shocking that people still believe and still hold on to that, and will rationalize things to themselves and rationalize it all. So it's not stupid. It's just direct result of the environment we grow up in, and we just got to help improve the dialogue and help improve people's critical thinking skills. So.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time. So is there one more that you'd like to share with us that was particularly amusing?
Let's talk about Otangelo.
Okay.
Everybody's favorite theist troll. And so Otangelo is a classic example of what I was just talking about in many ways. He's a presuppositionalist, although you got to work with him for a little while to get him to admit it. And I had a really long email conversation with him, much longer than any conversation I've had with him on the phone. And everything he looks at is through the lens of God is real. And so all of his arguments, all of that is colored by this. And so this becomes his filter. And so anything that's counter to that filter, he knows his science. He reads this stuff, and he knows it backwards and forwards and upside down. He knows it really well. He is not a dumb guy by any stretch of the imagination. His problem is that he's starting as a presuppositionalist. And so when you point out to him that, he's mistaking this piece of research, or he's misquoting it, and he's like, no, and then he goes on why. He quotes a lot of research, but it's all research that supports his position, or parts of it support his position. Mm-hmm. He's got a really good debate with Cease to Know and J. Mike, and he starts in on reading this guy who's pointing out that scientific consensus is not all it's cracked up to be. And it's like, well, no, it's not. It's a bunch of humans agreeing to stuff. They'll agree to stuff for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with science, even though they're supposed to be doing it for science, right? Back in the day, if it was a woman scientist or a person of color, those things mattered more than the evidence. And sometimes personal biases, if a scientist is not well liked, those biases will come out in consensus. So yes, there are problems with scientific consensus, but we don't have a better way. And so it doesn't mean scientific consensus isn't good. You just have to be aware of what the problems are with it, and kind of go from there. And as lay people, some of this stuff is so specialized that trying to follow it is really, really, really difficult. Vice Rhino, who really goes down some rabbit holes on some of this stuff, has all of my respect for all of the work that he does into reading all of the science that he does for his stuff. And it's just absolutely amazing that what he's able to go through and his understanding. And that's also what I'm trying to do as well, is getting into all of this stuff. And so, at some point you got to say, okay, I grant you everything you said. What's your evidence for God? He's got none. Show me the evidence for God. And all he's got is, well, what else could it be? And that's an argument from ignorance. And he knows that. He knows that. He knows at the end of the day, he's got an argument from ignorance. He knows at the end of the day, the only thing he can say about the Shroud of Turin, the best thing he can say is, we don't know. That's not what the experts on the Shroud of Turin say it's a fraud. But, if you grant him all of his science and all of his stuff, at the end of the day, what has he got? We don't know. And if you can press him on that, you can get him there. The problem is that you can't do that in a 20-minute conversation with him. And even, Cease to Know is fantastic on the logic, and J. Mike is also really, really good. And they couldn't do it in a 2-hour conversation with him. It took me a multi-week, couple of month conversation over email with him, where I was actually able to finally get him to admit it. And so that's problematic for him. But, he's not on a lot of shows anymore, or at least on ACA shows, because he keeps coming back with the same stuff over and over and over again. No matter how many times you show him he's wrong, he's still coming back with the same thing. And it all starts with his presuppositionalism. And, okay, fine, I presuppose I'm God. Prove me wrong. I just presuppose it, right? It doesn't work. And that is where he's coming from. But never think that Otangelo is an idiot, because he's not. And never think that he doesn't know what he's talking about, because he sort of kind of does, because he's read the original research papers. It's that he filters it through his presuppositionalism, and all of his conclusions come from that. And Gutsick Gibbons said, you got to be a leaf on the stream of data, taking you where the data goes, letting the data take you wherever it's going to go. And he doesn't do that. He's steadily rowing upstream to go to where he wants to go, and not where the data is going to take him. And that's the problem with presuppositionalism. But it's also, I think, a cautionary tale for all of us atheists too, because we can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And we see it happening, right? Sam Harris is doing it on some of the race and intelligence issues, and then why can't I think of his name? English evolutionary biologist. Shoot.
I'm sorry, I don't know who you're referring to.
Um,
Someone in the chat probably does, and somebody will throw the name up in a moment or two.
yeah. I'll probably think of it here in a second too. Anyway, and him on the trans issues. I don't think he's fully examined it, and he hasn't looked at all the biological evidence that's out there. Even though he's an evolutionary biologist, he's just been around for a really, really long time. Richard Dawkins. Okay. And, he's just wrong on this issue. But, yeah, he's looking at the data through this lens that he's got, and I don't know that he really realizes that he's doing that. He's not following the data where it's going to take him. He's starting with this presupposition and going from there. The smartest of us can do it, and certainly the dumbest of us can do it. We all have to be careful of not doing that on a lot of topics, because we all have things that we were taught as kids, and maybe we don't think about it anymore, but it still guides us and our beliefs and what we think is true, and that's kind of a problem. So
I think it's hard to draw the line between holding fast to what you know to be true and being open to realizing that what you think you know, you don't really know.
Mm-hmm. I have tried to use the phrase, my understanding is, or I think this is true, and be as much as possible less strident in what I know to be true. Because everything we know about the world can change tomorrow. There are people doing some really strange experiments that, if they come true, will change the way we think about things. Don't think they will, but who knows? We're just one experiment away, just one scientific discovery away from turning the world upside down and everything we know.
A lot of theists, as soon as they find out I'm an atheist, the first thing they ask me is, well, how did the universe come from nothing? And I kind of scratch my head and I said, first of all, I never asserted that it did. Why are you assuming that I do? And well, what's your position on that? And I said, I really don't have one. That's not my field. It's not something that's particularly important to me. And I do talk about it a little bit, but not a whole lot, because it's really not that important to me.
So, yeah, this is another one of my pet peeves with apologists. The only people saying something comes from nothing are apologists. You try and nail down a physicist on what nothing even means.
Yes. That's when I was a believer, I really truly thought I understood nothing. But when I was watching Rationality Rules doing his low fruit commentary on Matt Powell the other day, was it Matt Powell? Let's see. No, It wasn't Matt Powell. It was, I don't remember who it was, but anyway. It was Kennedy Report. I suddenly understood for the first time that I really have no concept of nothing, because and I can't remember the name of Stephen's guest, but Stephen's guest was explaining what the Big Bang is all about, and that it's this dark, this dense spot that began to expand.
Singularity, yeah.
Singularity, yeah. And suddenly I thought, well, what is the singularity expanding into? If space doesn't exist, how is it expanding? Where is it going? And suddenly I realized that I don't have a concept for that. And that was the first time I really understood that I don't understand what nothing is.
Yeah. Lawrence Krauss has a really good explanation of the closest that he thinks you can get to nothing in physics. And that is, you take a lead box and put it in a Faraday cage. Now, a Faraday cage will keep most of the electromagnetic spectrum out, and then the lead box will keep all your radiation out, if it's thick enough, etc. and then you suck everything out of the lead box so that it is a vacuum inside. There's nothing inside of it. And he says, and then you take that box in that Faraday cage and you take that out where gravity is zero. And he says, that's as close to nothing as we can get. The problem is that you still have the quantum fields, and they still exist. And so it is possible that you could get a universe there because of a quantum fluctuation. And that is the closest you can get. The philosophical concept of absolute nothing does not appear to exist anywhere in science. Physicists have a problem defining it because we don't know what it looks like. And so it's on the theist to prove that nothing can exist. And they can't do that because the physicists are like, no idea what this means. And so the singularity,
we have a physicist in, or I correct me, Matt, if you're a cosmologist or a physicist. Yeah, he is a physicist. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, in the chat. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing. Really, really fascinating book. Krauss is a great storyteller. I know he's got some issues, but his science is on point, and his ability to communicate is on point. So if you don't want to support him, borrow the book from the library or borrow from a friend. But anyway, it's a good book on this. But the singularity is not nothing. And so the current stuff that I'm reading is that space-time, they're not saying space and time, they're calling it space-time, comes into existence after the expansion has begun for whatever the word after means when there is no time.
Time, right. Yeah.
Right, that's my understanding of it, and I could be completely, and I'm trying to follow these brain people who are really, really deep into all the math and all this stuff, trying to explain it to lay people, and I'm not sure the translation always works, despite how good they are at explaining it. But so that is not nothing. Singularity is something. Well, what causes singularity? Well, the singularity exists before time does. So,
in a way, you could say it's eternal then.
For whatever eternal is still a concept that deals with time.
Time, yeah.
So we don't have the vocabulary, as far as I know, to describe things that exist outside of time or where time doesn't, because everything we do is time. And then causality goes completely out of the window as well at the quantum level. There are a number of experiments that show that causality is not a fundamental concept in the universe, that it's an emergent property of the universe, not a fundamental property of the universe as we know it. It's all these things become problematic, and I think the easiest thing is to simply say the theists are the only people who say something can't come from nothing, because physicists don't know what nothing is. So,
Okay.
Go, and that's not going to be satisfying to them at all. But
no, it's not.
That's it throws again. What's your evidence that that's even possible? So. And I agree with the folks in chat who are saying that the words I'm using don't make any sense outside of time, but I don't have better words, and I think I'm communicating the concept, and so that works. But a physicist would probably chop up my usage of those words pretty well, and maybe they actually do have a vocabulary for it, and I just don't know what it is. So that's an easy one to deal with, just by pointing out that the philosophical nothing of absolute nothing does not appear to exist anywhere, because quantum fields we can't get rid of.
And with that discussion on time in the beginning of time, we are now out of time.
A good segue.
I set this up as a conversation to be just something that was fun,
Mm-hmm.
and yet this has been extremely enlightening. I have learned a great deal. I've had a couple of conversations that were particularly aimed at elevating the conversation, and I think You've done a wonderful job of helping us with that as well.
Well, thank you.
It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been fun and an absolute blast. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, and we have 17 people watching right now, and there were only 5 at the beginning when you told where they can find you. So I'm going to let you repeat that for those who were not here at the beginning.
Okay, well, I am a host on the Atheist Experience. I've been on Talk Heathen, I've been on Truth Wanted, and on Nonprofits. Those are all, of course, shows Atheist Community of Austin puts on. And I have been a board member, although I'm no longer a board member of the Atheist Community of Austin, so I can speak somewhat more freely now, but not too much. And then I am also on the first Tuesday of the month. I'm on the Perspective on the EA network. And I occasionally pinch hit for the Sunday show on the line. Whenever David needs a emergency backup host, you can usually call me and get me in. And I'll be on the Atheist Experience, not this week, but I think next week. I forget off the top of my head, but I'll be on here shortly. I'm usually on there about once or twice a month. Okay. So that's where, and I'm also on all the social media, although I have a YouTube channel. I haven't posted anything on it in years. I have a TikTok, but I only look on and watch on TikTok. But I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, although most of those are mostly me sailing and living life. Although if you have questions, feel free to ask. And I will do my best to answer them. So.
Okay. And the link to Jim Barrows' Linktree is in the description of the video. And I also put into the description while we were talking the link to the article that Justin gave us on self-replicating robots as well. And next week on my show, I will have The Lone Spartan and Curse of Ham, 2 newer people in the, well, at least Curse of Ham is new to the community. I'm not sure about Lone Spartan, but I just met Lone Spartan, so he's new to me and new to my channel. And this week I will be putting out a produced video that will be dating advice for Christian men. So,
oh my.
Hey, I had to do something special for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, I'll have to tune in for that one.
That one won't be live. That'll be a produced video, and it'll probably be released on Saturday. It's about 2/3 the way done right now. Okay, with that, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us. Thank you to everyone in the chat. You have all been wonderful. You've been a wonderful guest. You've been a wonderful audience. You've had wonderful questions and comments, and that they have all really added to the show. And with that, good night and live your life.